Why do some women go through their entire lives with few or no female friends, while others seem to gather friendships without any effort? If you're a woman who has always felt like an outsider among other women, who watches groups connect while you stay forever on the edge, who has been left out, ignored, or simply never welcomed in the first place, there's something you need to understand. This isn't a failure of your social abilities. This isn't proof that something is broken inside you. What if your isolation is actually a sign, an energetic mark that shows something deep about your mind, your family history, and your spiritual purpose? Certain women carry a pattern that makes them fundamentally different from the usual ways women bond together. These women stir something in other females that leads to unexplainable rejection, quiet undermining, and a lifetime of standing apart. But here's what nobody tells you about this pattern. The very thing that keeps you away from shallow female circles might be the exact quality that marks you for a deeper journey, a psychological and spiritual path that most women will never take because they're too comfortable in the group. We're going to look at why you've never truly fit in among women, what old wound you're carrying that shows up again and again in your relationships, and how this forced aloneness might be the doorway to a kind of feminine strength that exists completely outside the need for others to tell you you're worthy. The pattern shows itself early, often in childhood, when a girl first feels she doesn't reflect back what other females expect to see. Our first meeting with the feminine happens through the mother. And when that relationship is marked by coldness, competition, or emotional neglect, something breaks in the daughter's ability to trust female connection. The mother wound doesn't simply create one hurt. It creates a template, a blueprint in the mind that repeats throughout life, in every friendship attempt, every circle of women she tries to join. You learned young that your true self was too much, too bright, too raw for the comfort of those around you. Perhaps your mother couldn't hold your emotional intensity, or your sisters competed rather than cheered for you, or your aunts whispered about you in tones that told you something was wrong with your very being. This wasn't paranoia. Children have an uncanny sensitivity to energetic rejection, and you felt it in your bones long before you had words for it. The mind records everything. What begins as mother wounding becomes the invisible wall that keeps you separated from female community throughout your life. The way this works operates beneath what you're aware of. You approach a group of women with genuine openness. Yet within minutes, sometimes seconds, the familiar chill comes down. Conversation flows around you, but rarely includes you. Invitations that seem promised never come. Connections that feel promising fade without explanation. This is what we might call the repetition pattern. The mind's unconscious drive to recreate the original wound in hopes of finally healing it. But each repetition only deepens the groove, confirms the belief that you are somehow fundamentally unfit for female friendship. What makes this particularly painful is the ancestral piece. Look back through your mother's family line, and you'll likely find other women who walked alone. Grandmothers who were talked about, great aunts who never quite fit in their communities, mothers who had acquaintances, but no true closeness. This pattern of feminine isolation travels through bloodlines like a silent inheritance, a wound passed from mother to daughter across generations. You're not just carrying your own loneliness. You're bearing the collected solitude of women who came before you. Women who also couldn't or wouldn't fit into the group feminine mask. But here's where the story shifts, where we must look at your solitude through a different view entirely. There's an archetype of the wild woman. The wild woman cannot be tamed by social rules or group expectations of how femininity should show itself. She moves by different rhythms, speaks different languages, honors different truths than the socialized feminine group. You don't take part in the ritual gossip that bonds many female groups because something in you sees it as a form of feeding on others. Women consuming the lives of others to avoid looking at their own. The coded conversations about makeup, diets, men, or motherhood in ways that reinforce group norms rather than question them. These feel empty to you, don't they? Not because you judge other women for engaging in them, but because your mind simply can't stay interested in what feels like performance rather than real encounter. Your emotional and spiritual depth registers as intensity, and intensity makes people uncomfortable. Most social bonds among women operate on an unspoken agreement to keep things light, manageable, entertaining. You bring questions to the table that have no easy answers. You speak truths that others prefer to avoid. You feel things too deeply and express them too honestly. In groups that function on emotional balance, you become the upsetting element, the one whose very presence threatens the carefully kept harmony. What you represent to other women is a mirror they don't want to look into. They see in you the parts of themselves they've had to push down to belong, the wildness they've had to tame, the depth they've had to flatten, the realness they've had to give up. This is shadow projection, the unconscious way by which we reject in others what we cannot accept in ourselves. You become the carrier of the group feminine shadow, the holder for everything women have learned to deny in order to be acceptable, leakable, safe. This is why you're often excluded in ways that can't quite be proven. The invitation that somehow got lost, the group text you weren't added to, the gathering you learned about after it happened. When confronted, there are always believable explanations, innocent mistakes, forgetfulness. But your nervous system knows the truth. You're not paranoid. You're reading accurately the energetic rejection that operates beneath the surface of social niceness. Women who shine without needing the group's permission, who exist fully without seeking approval from the collective, touch a wound in those still dependent on outside approval for their sense of self. Throughout history, women like you have been called witches, not because you practice magic, but because you couldn't be controlled by the group feminine rules. The witch is the woman who lives at the edge of the village, who has knowledge that threatens established order, who doesn't need the community's blessing to know her own power. Modern society no longer burns such women, but it still finds ways to isolate them, to mark them as other, to ensure they remain outside the circle of accepted femininity. The price you pay for refusing to lower your energy, for declining to dim your light, for insisting on being real over being accepted is loneliness. Real, bone deep, sometimes unbearable loneliness. But is it truly loneliness? Or is it something else entirely? This question opens a door to understanding one of the most important psychological and spiritual processes available to us. Individuation is the journey of becoming who you actually are rather than who the group expects you to be. It's the process by which the mind separates itself from mass thinking and discovers its unique shape, its singular purpose, its authentic voice. And this process, more often than not, requires periods of deep solitude. Not the solitude of exile or punishment, but the solitude of incubation, of growing, of transformation that can only occur in silence and stillness. Women going through individuation rarely find compatible female companionship because they're operating at a different frequency than those still living primarily through the social mask. The compromise between the individual and society. You're not better than other women. You're simply at a different stage of psychological and spiritual growth. You've heard a call that most people spend their entire lives ignoring, the call of the deeper self. That center of the mind that demands you become whole rather than merely acceptable. Can you feel the difference between empty loneliness and sacred solitude? Empty loneliness is the wound crying out for healing. The abandoned child within you still seeking the mother's embrace that never came. Sacred solitude is the soul's intentional retreat from the noise of group thinking in order to hear its own voice. Both can exist in you at the same time, and knowing which is which in any given moment requires deep honesty with yourself. The deeper self, that organizing principle at your core, sometimes arranges isolation not as punishment, but as protection and preparation. It knows you need distance from the group's constant conditioning to discover what you actually think, feel, believe, desire. It knows you need the silence to hear the whispers of your own soul beneath the noise of social expectations. It knows you need the solitude to transform your wounds into wisdom, your pain into presence, your loneliness into self-rule. This is where many women find themselves at midlife, isn't it? You've tried so hard for so long to find your place among other women, to create the friendships you see other people easily keeping, to build the community you were told women naturally create with each other. And despite your efforts, despite your genuine desire for connection, the pattern continues. You remain outside alone, watching others bond in ways that seem forever unavailable to you. You're being called to a different task entirely. Not the task of fitting in, but the task of becoming whole. Not the task of being approved by others, but the task of learning to approve of yourself from the deep feminine source within your own mind. This is what it means to connect with the great mother archetype that exists not outside, but inside the mind itself. You must become your own mother, your own best friend, your own witness. This isn't comfort for failing to find outside friendship. This is the actual spiritual work you came here to do. The external isolation is forcing you into internal peace, making with the wounded feminine within you. Every time another woman rejects you, excludes you, betrays you, or simply drifts away without explanation, you have a choice. You can let it confirm your unworthiness, or you can use it as an invitation to go deeper into your own inner territory, to discover the internal feminine source that never abandons, never judges, never requires you to be anything other than exactly what you are. The great mother archetype exists not just in external women or in the shared unconscious, but as a living presence within your own mind. This internal mother can offer what the external mother, the human mother bound by her own wounds and limitations, could never give. She sees you completely, loves you without conditions, witnesses your truth without flinching. But reaching her requires you to move through layers of grief and anger, to mourn the mothering you never received, to release the fantasy that someday someone out there will finally give you what you needed all along. This descent into the inner feminine territory is what the mystics called the dark night of the soul, a necessary breaking down before rebuilding at a higher level. You're being asked to mother yourself through this process, to hold your own hand in the darkness, to speak to your frightened parts with kindness rather than contempt. When the crying child within you reaches for comfort, you learn to be the one who provides it. When the rejected teenager in you rages at the unfairness of isolation, you learn to be the one who acknowledges her pain without being consumed by it. When the exhausted woman you are now wants to give up, you learn to be the one who whispers, "Keep going. You're almost through." This internal work is transformative in the truest sense. You're taking the base metal of rejection and turning it into the gold of self-possession. You're changing the wound of not being chosen by others into the wisdom of choosing yourself. You're converting the pain of isolation into the power of self-rule. This doesn't happen overnight. It's not a simple decision or single understanding. It's a process that unfolds over years, requiring you to repeatedly return to your own center, to repeatedly choose self, loyalty over social approval, to repeatedly honor your truth even when it costs you connection. True psychological maturity involves what we might call the bringing together of opposites, the capacity to hold contradiction without falling into one side or the other. You must learn to hold both your desire for connection and your acceptance of solitude, both your wound of rejection and your gift of independence, both your human need for being seen and your spiritual capacity for self-sufficiency. This isn't about rising above human needs. It's about not being destroyed by their non-fulfillment. It's about finding a way to be fully human and fully whole, even when life doesn't give you what every child deserves, what every woman longs for, the simple grace of being seen and loved by her own kind. The paradox reveals itself here. The more you make peace with your own internal feminine, the less desperately you need approval from external women. The more you learn to mother yourself with compassion and witness yourself with understanding, the less the absence of female friendship feels like a fatal flaw in your being. You stop asking what's wrong with you and start asking what's right about you that the group couldn't contain. You stop trying to fix yourself to fit in and start celebrating the aspects of yourself that were always too wild, too deep, too real for comfortable company. The energy you carry has changed through this process of forced individuation, where once you might have given off a desperate hunger for acceptance, now you give off something entirely different. It's the frequency of a woman who has stopped abandoning herself for others, who has learned that betraying your own, knowing to gain social acceptance is the cruelest form of self-harm. Other women sense this shift, though they might not be able to name it. Some are drawn to it, recognizing in you a permission they've been seeking in their own lives. Others are pushed away by it, threatened by the mirror you hold up to their own compromises. There's a phenomenon of meaningful coincidences that reveal the hidden connections between inner psychological states and outer events. Apply this view to your experience of friendlessness and a pattern appears. The external isolation mirrors an internal process of differentiation, of separating your authentic self from the false selves you've worn to survive. Every friendship that dissolves, every group that excludes you, every connection that fails to happen, these aren't random rejections. They're the universe clearing space for you to meet yourself without the distraction of relationships that would keep you comfortable in your mask rather than pushing you toward your truth. Consider the symbolism of transformation. The first stage of change is called the blackening, a period of breaking down and despair where everything false must die before something true can be born. Your years of social isolation, particularly if they've been marked by confusion, grief, and self-questioning, represent this blackening phase. You're in the fire being heated and broken down so that the gold of your authentic self can separate from the waste of your conditioned self. This is not comfortable. It was never meant to be, but it is necessary. The woman who emerges from this process, if she doesn't become bitter or hardened by it, possesses a quality connected with the whole self. She has accepted her shadow, owned her darkness as well as her light, accepted her completeness as a human being rather than trying to present only acceptable portions of herself to the world. She has faced her unloved parts, her rejected aspects, her hidden shames, and instead of denying them, she's brought them into a larger wholeness. This is what makes her both attractive and threatening, both magnetic and isolating. She's no longer playing the game of partial showing that most social bonding requires. Think about the fairy tales, particularly those featuring women who go through change through isolation. Sleeping Beauty doesn't wake up in a crowd. She awakens in solitude in the private room where she's been sleeping for 100 years. Snow White's deepest transformation occurs in the forest, alone with the animals and the dwarfs who exist outside normal human society. Rapunzel grows her power in a tower, separated from the world. These aren't just children's stories. They're archetypal patterns for a particular kind of feminine development that requires withdrawal from the group to discover personal power. Your tower, your forest, Your sleeping chamber is the very isolation you've been enduring. You haven't been separate from life. You've been growing a different kind of life, one that doesn't depend on external approval for its existence. The years you've spent developing an internal reference point, learning to trust your own perceptions, building a relationship with the deeper layers of your mind. These years have been essential preparation for a way of being in the world that draws from source rather than from social approval. Does this mean you'll never have female friends? Not necessarily, but it means the friends you do attract, if any come, will be of a different quality entirely. They won't be the surface friendships based on shared hobbies or living nearby. They'll be soul recognitions, rare meetings between women who've also walked through the fire of individuation and emerged on the other side. These friendships, when they occur, don't require constant contact or approval. They exist in a different dimension, sustained by mutual respect for each other's self, rule rather than need for each other's approval. There's a concept called the transcendent function, the mind's capacity to hold opposing energies in tension until a third thing emerges, something new that transforms both sides. Your experience of loneliness contains this potential. The tension between your desire for connection and your inability to find it in usual ways, held consciously rather than denied or bitterly rejected, can give birth to a new understanding of what connection actually means. Perhaps true connection isn't about the number of friends you have or the frequency of social events. Perhaps it's about the depth of presence you bring to your encounters, however rare, and the quality of relationship you maintain with your own soul in the between times. Some women, however, are genuinely meant to walk much of their path alone. This isn't failure, it's calling. The archetype of the hermit, the mystic, the wise woman who lives at the forest's edge. This is a valid and valuable feminine expression. You might be carrying this archetypal pattern, living it out not by choice, but by soul design. The world needs women who don't require the group's permission to exist, who model the possibility of wholeness in solitude, who demonstrate that a woman's worth isn't determined by how many friends she can gather around her. Your journey has taught you things that women surrounded by easy friendships never learn. You know how to sit with yourself in the dark hours without distraction. You know how to process your emotions without immediately putting them onto others. You know how to make decisions based on your own internal compass rather than group agreement. You know how to find meaning and purpose that doesn't depend on social approval. These are not small achievements. These are the fruits of forced individuation, the gifts born from the painful necessity of learning to be your own companion. The vibration you carry now, if you've done this work with awareness rather than bitterness, is distinctive. You've stopped explaining yourself to people who don't want to understand. You've stopped dimming your light to make others comfortable. You've stopped twisting yourself into shapes that might finally earn you a place at the table. Instead, you've built your own table, set your own standards, created your own definition of what a rich feminine life can be. This is sovereignty, the inner queendom that no external circumstance can touch. The individuation process, while painful and isolating, ultimately serves not just the individual, but everyone. Every person who completes their own becoming, who accepts their shadow and honors their authentic self, raises the awareness of the entire human family. Your willingness to endure the loneliness of becoming real rather than settling for the company that would require you to remain false. This serves something larger than your personal happiness. You're modeling possibility for other women, showing them that survival, even thriving, is possible outside the group feminine agreement. The younger women watching you, perhaps from a distance, see something in you they can't yet name. They see a woman who doesn't ask permission, who doesn't need approval, who carries herself with the quiet dignity of someone who knows her own worth. You might not know you're being observed, might not realize you're teaching simply by existing authentically, but this is often how wisdom passes itself on. Not through words or direct teaching, but through the witnessed example of a woman who chose truth over belonging and found that she could not only survive the loneliness, but transform it into something beautiful. This doesn't mean the wound has completely healed. You might still feel the ache when you see groups of women laughing together, still wonder what it would be like to have that easy friendship, still grieve the friendships you never got to have. These feelings are human and valid, but they no longer define you. They no longer convince you that something is fundamentally wrong with your being. You've learned to hold both truths at the same time. The sadness of missing something you've never had, and the peace of knowing you're exactly where your soul needs you to be. The inheritance you leave, whether you have daughters or not, whether anyone consciously acknowledges it or not, is profound. You prove that a woman's value isn't measured by her social circle. You demonstrate that being real matters more than being accepted. You show that solitude, when embraced with awareness, can be a powerful teacher rather than a prison. You embody the possibility that wholeness is achievable, even, perhaps especially, in the absence of the approval society tells us we must have. There's a particular kind of woman who will understand every word of this, who will feel seen in ways she's never felt seen before, who will recognize herself in this description, not as diagnosis, but as acknowledgement. If that's you, know this. Your aloneness is not evidence of your inadequacy. It might be evidence of your courage, your depth, your refusal to betray yourself for the comfort of belonging to something that was never truly home. The path you're walking is ancient, worn smooth by the feet of countless women before you, who also chose the difficult grace of their own company over the easy lie of false connection. If this exploration has touched something true in you, if you've recognized your own story in these words, consider subscribing to this channel where we continue to explore the hidden dimensions of feminine psychology and the journey toward authentic selfhood. Leave a comment sharing your own experience of walking alone among women. Your story matters. Your solitude speaks.